All right, everyone. Thank you. Sorry for a little bit of a delay here. For some reason, I clicked on the wrong button coming in. Um, Tonight, I'd like to focus on some um, uh, decision making, and I really want to hit a couple topics that maybe aren't covered in the text. This week is a slightly different. The exercise I gave you, the SSS software case. I'm asking you to make a decision on 10 items in the case. Be like you coming to work and there's 10 things on your desk you have to make a decision about. And then, I've asked you to comment on what your decision is, some of your thoughts. And then I'm going to give you Friday morning, I'm going to load for you expert opinion. And what I want you to do in the second part of the paper is kind of analyze your answers in light of some of the expert opinion. All right. This chapter also talks quite a bit about creativity in decision making, some of the biases, etc. One of the items I really like in this chapter is that assessment on creativity and innovation. Sometimes people say, well, I'm not a creative person. I think what it does is helps you analyze the different ways you can be creative. All of us have the potential to be creative in different ways. And I really like that assessment that's used on creativity. So let me get into a discussion on decision making. Um, okay. Um, and I'm just going to hit a couple of highlights. I made 3 videos available to you on rational decision making that you should be looking at, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Uh, but the types of knowledge that you and I have come from basically 2 sources. One is explicit knowledge. It's the kind of knowledge we get from books and from training programs. It's general knowledge we get. The other kind of knowledge we have is tacit knowledge. This is the knowledge that is internal to us based on our experiences in life. Uh, it's highly personal and is based on experience. It's difficult, if not impossible, to articulate it. This is why consultants are in demand. They have a lot of tacit information. And I know from experience, uh, over time, there are certain situations I can walk into and size them up pretty quickly based purely on my experience. That's tacit knowledge. So the types of knowledge you have, and it does lead to a type of individual decision making, that programmed or unprogrammed. Programmed is if you have expert knowledge and can recognize the problem, that probably leads to a more instinctual, what we would call instinctual decision making. The non-programmed is if you're not an expert and can't make the decision without further information, that's where things like the rational decision making model comes into play. So a lot of it is, a lot of it is based on the kind of knowledge we have, how much of an expert we are. And I think all of you would agree that the rational decision making model makes sense. We hear it all the time. Define the problem, generate a lot of alternatives, evaluate and select an alternative, and then implement and evaluate. And you could use this, you're buying a car, you're buying a house. One of the problems is with each of these steps, there are inherent problems. Defining the problem is probably the single most difficult element in the whole process. What exactly is the problem? We have a tendency to simplify stating the problem. The football team is not doing well. let's blame it on the coach. Boom. We look for that simple type of and usually problems are more complex than maybe our simplified approach we want to take. Um, along and along with our rational decision making, there's certain biases that we have. I just explained the one. So we're trying to identify the problem. What we try to do is boil the problem down to something easily understood. And boy, you see this all the time in politics. Very easy solutions to very complex problems, and we try and sell those. Or the second is develop an exhaustive list of alternatives. A lot of times our tendency is to come to a few that are very straightforward, something similar to what we already understand. So we usually don't expand our alternatives beyond our limited knowledge base. Evaluate the alternatives. A lot of times we evaluate alternatives as soon as we think of it and make the decision too early. A lot of times the information we get is distorted. And sometimes a problem we pick as the first acceptable. Let's say in your mind, you say, I'm going to buy a car and I'm going to go to these three dealerships to see my best deal. You go to the first dealership and you find a car you fall in love with and buy it immediately. That's what's called picking the first acceptable. And you just blew up your rational decision-making model. I think the only point I'm making here is just be aware of some of the inherent shortcomings and biases we might have in that rational decision-making model. Jim Smither on the videos goes into a lot of detail that I find very helpful. And I think this is a good structure to think about decision-making. One of the items I wanted to hit on, I don't believe the textbook really doesn't hit on this. It's called leader decision-making styles. What are some of the styles you should begin to use in making a decision? And there are four of them, four primary styles. One is the autocratic. And what that means is the leader makes the decisions alone, not alone. So that's more the authoritarian or autocratic. The consultative approach is for you as a leader to present a problem, get input from everybody, then you make the decision about it. So you ask people's opinion and make the decision. The facilitative approach, the leader presents the problem and becomes a problem solver along with the people. So you kind of seek consensus. You try and solve the problem together and do what the best answer people come up with. And then a final style of leadership is delegative, where you as the leader just turn the decision making over to the group or to others. And these are, I think it's also good when you think about decision making to think of if you're a manager, what your style is. Now, which style should you choose? Well, there are 7 situations that would have an impact on the style. One is how significant is the decision you're making? Is it super significant? If in an organization, if you're just deciding on layoffs, that might be a pretty significant. How important is commitment to the decision of the people who maybe have to implement it? How much expertise do you have? This comes to your expertise as a leader. What is the likelihood of commitment? Are there shared objectives between you and everyone impacted by the decision? And what's your expertise in the decision making? And then how good are we at working at a team? And these are all questions to ask. This comes into play too on team decision making. Now there's a model here. It's rather complicated. You can look at it when you get the slides. But whoops, if you go across here and across the top, I have uh, all those elements of the context, decision significance. And if you think of the decision you're making, and if the decision significance is high, that puts you up in this quadrant, and then you move to the next one. How important is commitment? If that's low, so do you see how you go across these various elements, and it leads to the type of decision you need to make. I had a case I was going to play for you. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie 13 Days. I'm putting a clip of it tonight, and you can watch that. It's about 10 minutes clip. 13 Days is the decision Kennedy had to make, President Kennedy, when Cuba had the missiles. Pretty heavy duty decision. And think about if you watch that video, open up this slide here and take a look at the decision making taking place there. He's there with his advisors, with the military, etc. And you could play out his decision across this chart. So so this is an element I'm adding to this discussion on decision making. What tends to be your style, and this is a structure to think about whenever you're thinking of your leadership style. And it may come into play. You have people that work for you in terms of delegating and doing things like that. And there's the movie 13 Days. I'm going to put a clip in tonight's section. Whoops. And so this is a chart, whether to use rational decision making or some of the creative problem solving approaches. And the book, if the outcome is your outcome predictable, and is there sufficient information? If it's yes, then you could use the rational. But if you're dealing with unpredictable outcomes or sufficient information is not there, you may have to look at some more creative approaches. And the book does a nice job of talking about different types of creative thinking. We talk about thinking outside the box. And the assessment that you have here gives a little bit of a sense of the type of creativity or innovative style that you have. I want to kind of spend the rest of the time tonight introducing you to a concept called problem framing. Not problem solving, but problem framing. And I'll refer to this framework, and I put some notes in the module for you on this. This comes from a book I read called Problem Framing. Maybe one of the most significant management books I have read. Made a big impact on me in terms of understanding organizations I'm in and situations I'm in. And this talks about framing problems rather than solving problems necessarily. And what I'm talking about here is you developing some conceptual versatility to look at situations you're in. And good managers, successful leaders I have run into have a lot of conceptual versatility that they bring to situations. And they become very conscious of the assumptions they make about a problem. And what is a frame? Why am I using this terminology? Well, just think of yourself looking out a window frame. And when you look outside through a window, each of you sees a different reality based on your relationship to the frame you're looking through. And that's why this terminology is, if you change the frame you're looking at a situation from, then that situation looks entirely different to you. So we're talking about a perspective on a problem rather than a diagnosis at this point. And I'll go through, there's four basic frames that are seem to be at work in organizations. And I'll go through those with you. But a lot of times when we diagnose a problem, we make one of three common mistakes. They're myths about problems. One of the mistakes we make in diagnosing a problem is what's called the people blaming approach. This is one of the easiest answers we have to solving a problem. Let's find someone to blame. It happens all the time in organizations. You see it particularly in the news media talking about their sports teams. Who can we blame for our loss? Another common myth is in decision making is it's the bureaucracy. You can't get anything done here. It's just the bureaucracy. And another one is I'm powerless to do anything about it. And in all three cases, we can kind of wipe our hands and free ourselves from responsibility. But in the problem framing approach, what I'm going to talk about is four frames with which you can look at a situation. One is called the first is called the structural, the human, the political, and the symbolic. The structural frame emphasizes the importance of formal roles and relationships. It emphasizes structures, being organized. You're trying to organize your work, divide labor, create rules, policies. No organization can exist. You got to have job descriptions and you got to have a hierarchy. Who reports to who? Who's responsible for what? These are all the things in the structural frame. A lot of times when people view who are structuralists, they view problems from the structural point of view, and the structure does not fit the situation. And if you see a problem, you're saying, we got to reorganize. That's the way, that would be your approach if you're a structuralist. It's based on some assumptions that organizations exist to accomplish goals. All we have to do is find the right structure. Organizations are rational. And if we have people who specialize, they're more productive. What's really important is coordination. We know who the bosses are. We know who has to do what. And then we believe structures can be designed. I'll keep going the sports analogy. You'll hear coaches come in and people will say about coaches, they bring a great system and they have a system they're going to use and they try and fit the people to the system. That would be a structural frame. The human frame, and I might add the structural frame is one we talked about quite a bit in school. We teach it. There are courses in it. The next is the human frame or the humanistic frame, human resource frame. The focus here is on the people in the organization. And individuals have needs, biases. They have different strengths and weaknesses. And the best organizations fit the organization to the people, the talent of the people. And the ideal is to find a type of organization that will enable people to get the job done while feeling good about what they are doing. If there's a problem in our organization, it's because the human needs aren't being met in the organization. And it's interesting if let's say you're at a meeting and let's say someone at the meeting comes from a structural point of view and someone else comes from a human point of view, you two are going to clash in your ideas. One person's going to say, We got to get more organized. And the other person might say, hey, the people's needs aren't being met. And you go back and forth and argue. So there's a lot to this perspective you bring to a situation. I have I have to see if I included it in the module. If I didn't, I'll go put it back in. I have an assessment you can take, which measures your uh, which measures your perspective on these frames. Um, there are some assumptions about this human frame. Organizations exist to meet human needs. Organizations and people need each other. When the fit is poor, both will suffer. Either the organization or individual will exploit the situation. And when the fit is good, both benefit. If there's meaningful work of people, then organizational goals will be met. And I think this is true, just as much as the structural stuff is true. There's a metaphor for these. In the structural frame, the metaphor, the organization is like a machine. In this assumption, the human frame, the metaphor is the organization is like we're one big family here. So those are the first two frames that a lot of people look at an organization perspective. But then there are two others that I think are equally important. And the next is the political frame. And when I'm using the word political here, I mean, most of us tend to have a negative um, connotation when we hear the word political, or if you're in an organization and someone says you're a good politician, we don't always take that as a positive. However, I would maintain that anyone has to be a good political leader, and I'll say, what does that mean? I think you can have good politics and bad politics. This political frame comes into play in future chapters when we're talking about power and influence and negotiation ability and ability to network with people. The political frame says that organizations are arenas of scarce resources, and power and influence affect the allocation of those resources. So conflict is expected because not everyone in an organization has equal access to resources. You're going to have to know how to bargain, coerce, compromise. They're part of everyday life. And there's a problem in a situation if there is an uneven distribution of power or there's a power vacuum. And so political skill and acumen are important. I have a little slide I'll talk about later are what are political skills and how you can increase your skills as a politician. So assumptions here are that if you approach things from a political framework, you're looking at the allocation of resources. And you say organizations are a coalition of interest groups, special interest groups. And interest groups have different values and change is slow. Organizational goals happen because of bargaining, negotiation, vying for things. So power and conflict are central features of organizational life. This kind of looks at the organization as a jungle, you might say would be a metaphor. And then the last one is the symbolic frame, use of symbols and stories. This is at the opposite end of rationality. You would say shared values and culture are very critical. And boy, the culture, there's a lot of mergers of organizations that don't work out because the cultures are so different between the organizations. I don't know if you've ever heard people talk about that, or if you've been involved in any kind of a merger. When the values are just so different. Organizations are driven by rituals, stories, myths, rather than rules and authority. And you take a look at how important icons are to organizations and the meaning of those icons. Organization is drama, basically. And the problem is you have bad actors or symbols, important values lose their meaning, or rituals lose their power. Um, you improve things through symbol and myth and vision and getting people to buy into values and culture. This all has to do with the symbolic frame. You're talking about engaging the whole person emotionally, physically. So some of the assumptions here are what is most important is not what happened, but the meaning people attach to what happened. And the way people interpret events is very important. Many significant events are very ambiguous, and ambiguity and uncertainty undermine rational approaches to analysis, problem solving, and decision making. In times of high uncertainty, people look at symbols and values to help give meaning. And basically, this says people want meaning, and do the organizational symbols and how people act give meaning and value to people. And then the last one, humans create symbols to reduce confusion and give meaning. That's why all religions are highly symbolic because they're dealing with very ambiguous situations. So there's a lot of symbol associated with religion because a lot of things religion deals with are very mysterious, like death and all of that. Same's true in organizations. So what I'm presenting here is each frame has its own vision or reality. If you use these frames, you're more likely to appreciate the depth and complexity of organizational life. Effective managers rely intuitively on the different frames, blending them into a coherent, pragmatic, personal theory of behavior. Understanding all four frames can enrich your intuition and increase your ability to act effectively in very complicated and ambiguous situations. So, just here's a little bit of a summary. Structural emphasizes rationality, importance of clear structure. And a good leader is someone who thinks clearly, makes good decisions, has good analytic skills, and can design structures and systems that get the job done. In the human resource, you emphasize people, and the central task of management is a good fit. And you believe in the importance of coaching, participation, motivation, teamwork. And a good leader is a facilitator who supports and empowers others. So two different forms of leader there. Another, the political, believe that managers and leaders live in a world of competing interests. And the central task then of management is to mobilize resources. Political leaders emphasize the importance of building power base, alliances, networks. That in this one, a good leader is an advocate and negotiator who understands politics and is comfortable with conflict. Again, another legitimate definition of a leader. And then the symbolic is believes that the essential task of management is to provide vision and inspiration. They relied on charisma and a flair for drama to get people excited and committed. A good leader is a prophet and visionary who uses symbols, tells stories, and frames the experience in ways that give people hope and meaning. So a good leader is one who can motivate and inspire people, provides a vision for the future. So, understanding each of these frames actually helps you get a sense of which approach or combination of approach works best. And let me say something about you being a politician. Basically, or given these assumptions, differences, scarce resources, the fact that we have to rely on each other, the dilemma for you as a leader is how do you confront the realities of diversity, scarcity, and self-interest and still channel human action in cooperative and socially valuable directions? That's the challenge. And they're saying political skills help with that. So as a good politician, you have to set an agenda. You try to gain support of constituents. Networking and coalition building are big, big, big political skills. You know, you all know the importance of networking, both inside and outside your organizations. That's a political skill you're using because when you build, you're trying to build ways of influence. That's what we'll talk about. You'll find in the chapter on power, how to build power. And then your ability to bargain and negotiate becomes real important if you're a good politician. And then here's another one I put in called manager as an actor almost. Because of ambiguity in our lives or situations, individuals create symbols, stories to bring order, meaning, and predictability. So, what are some of the skills of a symbolic leader? Well, they frame and interpret experience. They use symbols to capture attention of people. They discover and communicate a vision. They tell stories. The symbolic leader understands the deepest values and most pressing concerns of his or her constituent. So, just a few words on leadership in each of these four frames. An effective structural leader is a social architect. An ineffective one is a petty tyrant. These are the. An effective human or HR leader is a catalyst, servant, and an ineffective one is a wimp or a pushover. Think of some of these terms in describing leaders that we hear. An effective political leader is an advocate. An ineffective one is a con artist or a hustler. And an effective symbolic leader is a visionary or prophet. And an effective one is a fanatic or a fool. I'm just thinking of the symbolic leader, Steve Jobs, how much of a symbolic leader he was. Staging, how they staged any new announcement on the Apple iPhone. That was all symbolic leadership. So here's the source of the book. If you're looking for a good management book, I would highly, highly recommend this. And there are two other things I wanted to share with you tonight that I put in the I don't have them up here right now, but I've shared them in the. I'm opening up tonight where this module for tonight. I have some more information in there on reframing organizations. I have the PowerPoints in there, and I'll put this video in there, and I'll go look. If it's not in there, what I will put up for you is an assessment you can use on determining your leadership style according to these four frames. Which one are you? Which kind of frame do you prefer? I also have a handout in there on different biases that we tend to have. 5 or 6 really common biases that impact our decision making. So I'm a little shorter tonight. I was going to play that videotape for you on 13 days. The problem is if I played it for you YouTube won't allow me to. If apparently it's copyrighted, so YouTube won't allow me to upload it as part of this presentation. So I will put it in there, and I encourage you to look at that model I presented on decision making and take a look at that video. Also, take a look at some of the notes I put in there on reframing problems and reframing organizations. So I've spoken enough. Do any of you have any thoughts on what you heard tonight, or what you're finding in the chapter this week? Anyone? Don't be shy. I can't see anyone. Stephanie, you're the only one I can see. Is everyone else eating dinner? All right. Anyone have anything? I'll let you go for tonight, and I will make sure some of the stuff is up there for you in the February 4th module. All right. And that's it for tonight then. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, Cooper. Good night, Teresa.